Well, hello, everybody. This is Chris Wells, the Bass Chaplain, and this is the inaugural podcast of the Bass Chaplain Fishing Podcast. I've had to say that over and over and over again just to get used to it because I keep slipping up. And I'm going to tell you, I can write 3 books on what I don't know about podcasting. It has been an adventure. I can't believe that we're actually here today. And I've been talking about this forever, talking about podcast. And the day has finally arrived. And I'm so excited for the Bass Fishing Podcast, Bass Chaplain Fishing Podcast. See, I can't even do it yet. And let me tell you, there's a bunch of things that could go wrong today. Number one thing that could go wrong is this sign. There's a 60% chance this sign just might fall off the wall during the podcast. You just never know what's going to happen. We're still working out the kinks and we're still working out all the things that we got to do, but we're going to press on today. And, you know, the guy I'm about to introduce you to is someone I know a lot of bass pros, and I know a lot of guys that are in the fishing industry, but I want to tell you, and they're all of those people I consider my friends. But this guy, I consider one of my closest friends. He's a guy, I probably call him too much. I call him to say, hey, what color spinnerbait do I need to throw in this kind of water? And he's like, what are you doing, man? But I want to introduce you, professional angler, James Niggemeyer. James, we are so happy to have you here today, man. Welcome.
Chris, this is great. Thanks for having me. We finally connected. It's after a couple different tries. Here we are.
Man, I tell you, I can't believe it, man. I'm so excited. I'm just jacked up. I even had to cut on the fan above my head because I was just, you know, everybody tells me there's 2 things about me. I'm the fastest speaking South Carolinian anybody will ever hear. And number 2, I'm the only white preacher in America that can out-sweat TD Jakes. And that is the truth, man. I'm telling you right there. But I'm excited to have you here today. And man, when did we meet? When was do you remember the exact time? We've known each other now probably 14, 15 years. And when was the first time you remember? You remember?
I remember the first time that I saw you. I don't know that I was invited to something where you were speaking, and it was at Jay Ellis's kids camp on Lake Tyler. That's the first time I was made aware of who you are. And I don't know that we even met, but he had you there and I was there as well, working with everybody and working with the kids and stuff like that. So that's the very first time. And I'm going to say that's right at, I think it's the second year I was married. First or second year I was married. So that would be 05-ish.
Wow, man. I'd forgotten about that. That was you know, you say, why in the world did Chris Wells, the Bass Chaplain, get invited to Jay Ellis fishing camp? Well, they invited me to play a character. And I played a character called Bucky. Okay. And I had a bunch of novelty teeth and I never broke character until the last day. And so everybody thought, I don't know where this guy's from. I don't know who he is, but well, I'm amazed that you're still friends with me after that. That's pretty cool.
It was great. You did an awesome job with it. It had all the kids laughing.
Well, you know, Jay brought those kids in there to teach them how to fish. And they had like the best bass pros around actually take them out on Lake Tyler and fish, but they also presented the gospel and talked about what it means to be a follower of Christ. And that's just awesome. Now, James, you live in Van, Texas. Is that right?
That's right.
Tell us why did you pick Van, Texas? Now you're not from Texas originally, are you?
No, I'm originally from California, Southern California. Glendale is the town that I was born and raised in. And in 2001, this is a long story. I'll cut some of this out. But in 2001, after a friend of mine and actually team fishing partner, Dean Rojas, has suggested you need to move to the Lake Fork and start guiding out there. That he was instrumental in me moving from California to Texas, as well as Mark Davis. So those 2 guys really kind of spoke into my life. And that's how I packed everything up into my little Chevy Astro van and I drove out from California to Texas.
Okay. So you made the journey. You got some advice for some really, really heavy hitters. Okay. Rojas and Mark Davis. So were you married at the time or what was what was your thinking at the time? Where were you?
No, I got married in 2004 and in 2001, man, I just knew that if I wasn't a pro fisherman or pursuing a career as a pro fisherman, that I didn't know if I could get my next breath. I mean, it was one of those
Wow.
things. I just knew I had to do this, and it just propelled me forward into the unknown. I mean, I literally had like, you know, a few dollars to my name. I think I had like, honestly, like I had like $1,800 to my name. I had a mountain of debt, packed it all in my Astro van. And actually Dean Rojas was on his way to his first, I think it was the first top 150 event or the second top 150 event of the season. And I went to from Southern California. I went to his house in Lake Havasu City, and I just followed him all the way out here to Lake Fork, because he introduced me to Lance Vick and Kelly Jordan, and
Mm.
that's kind of the beginning. That's what really kind of, I mean, I love Texas. It's home.
Man, I hear you. I love Texas too. I went to seminary out in Texas, and I would have stayed if I'd have had my bass boat out there. I probably would have never done any work at all. I remember I was supposed to be studying Hebrew, and I was reading Bassmaster magazine, and so it was probably explains a lot of my theological positions here today. But so you got a family. Tell me about your family.
So in 04, we got married, my wife and I, Sandy, and I have a son, Daniel, and he's 16, and my daughter's Abigail, and she's 13.
Awesome. Awesome.
My wife, they all used to travel with me on tour. We used to go in a motorhome and all that. And that was a lot of fun. And that had some challenges too, but I'm so glad we did it and they were able to do that. And then now they just stay home. My wife homeschools them, and my son loves to hunt, and my daughter is all about all things girl, which is like dancing and singing and all those types of things. And I guess my son's all about all things boys, hunting and just in the woods and hanging out with his buddies. And my wife loves her organic garden and her chickens.
Yeah, I've been over to your house before. You let me pull up there one time. I did the camping thing for a while too. And I've done, this is what I noticed when I first got, to be the Bassmaster chaplain was, there's really three kind of groups of guys. They're the campers, they're the hotel guys and hotel motel guys. And then they're the house renting guys. And you're one of the camping guys on the fishing. And I've done all three of those. I've stayed in hotels, I've done the camper, and I've done the house rental thing. And I by far love the camping better than anything. It was just the greatest experience ever. But you let me come out there to Van, Texas, and Van, Texas, it's awesome to me, not only because you got so many lakes around you and it's such a great place to raise a family, and it's just good family values around that area. But also my favorite Christian singer of all time is buried near Van, Texas. And your wife, Sandy, took me to see his grave. He was tragically, taken from us in a plane crash, Keith Green. And that was one of the highlights of my life, was going out there and seeing the grave of Keith Green. It was just an awesome time. I appreciate her taking me out there. So awesome deal. Well, we're going to transition into a little fishing talk here. I know a lot of guys, when they tune into podcast, they're like me, they're voracious. They want to learn something. Okay. And so I'm always trying to learn something. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you was if you could give us just 3 techniques of things that would help us as anglers, just an average guy as an angler. What would 3 things that the average guy could do to, on a regular basis to be able to get better and to be a better bass fisherman? What would you say?
I would say that number one, if you don't like to fish soft plastic, you should really brush up on fishing soft plastics. And the reason I'm going to say that is they may not be necessarily the best bait on a given day, but you can get bit on soft plastics literally year round. And that can be said of a lot of different bait types, but soft plastics are so good because you can fish them in heavy cover, you can fish them in real clear water just by adjusting the size and shape and colors of them. There's just a lot of different things you could do with it, and you're going to get bit. And I feel like that kind of leads me into another thing that I think would be really important is get out and go to places where fishing's really good. I love to fish for the dumb ones. I like to call them the dumb ones, the ones that just will bite just about anything out there. But there's something about getting bit that really kind of increases your confidence of, hey, I can do this. So definitely throw plastics, because I feel like you get bit and it'll really kind of help you understand where the fish are in the water column, whether they want it fast or whether they want it slow, those types of things. It helps you understand their behavior. And then obviously getting bit is important, because I feel like, I do some guiding on Lake Fork, and when I get people in the boat, a lot of them are unsure, or even have this idea that, hey, for some reason they're singled out as far as people in the angling community that aren't going to get bit when they go fishing. And so I think when you go to a place where you can get bit a lot, it kind of helps to erase that, that bad stigma or idea that for some reason you're just like bad luck or something. And by the way, I don't really play into the luck factor. I think it's something that exists, but I think it's more like chance. But anyways, kind of getting off the track,
Right,
but
yeah.
go to
No,
a place
that's
where you
good.
can get bit, because it definitely elevates your confidence in what you're doing. And I think that's great. And a third thing, I would say understand what it is to try to understand where your bait is, whether you're fishing a crankbait or spinner bait, and remain in that connection. Have that mental aspect of, okay, I feel my bait coming through. Let's say it's a spinner bait. I feel the blades thumping, and I felt it run into a stick or something. It hit something, or maybe I'm slow rolling and it's down on the bottom. I feel it bumping down along the bottom. Whatever bait that is, be mentally aware of where your bait is, because a lot of times, your bites aren't going to be just those bone jarring, hits. A lot of times they're going to be subtle, depending upon how aggressive or unaggressive the fish are. And if you have an understanding of what your bait is doing, you'll be able to pick up on those bites that are a little harder to kind of to pick up on, to sense down your rod reel line. So always be thinking about where your bait is, what kind of, in your mind, what kind of depth it's in, and visualize it coming through the cover. Whenever you have that mental connection to your bait and what you're doing, and you're not just going, man, did I turn the coffee pot off this morning? I wonder about my buddy, if he's going over to the car shop. Those things that we have a tendency to do, those really play against our success on the water. So I would say be mentally into what you're doing. Be fully attentive to the situation right in front of you.
Man, those are great tips. I suggest guys, whenever I'm really into a podcast, I even take a little notebook and I write stuff down. Now, listen, I've heard guys say all the time, they say, I'm going to let the fish tell me what they want that day. What does that mean? I mean, I'm down there listening going, hey, tell me what you want. I'll throw everything in the tackle box. But what does a pro mean when he says, hey, we're going to let the fish tell me, what you want? Is that what you mean on that third deal like that? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, and what they generally are meaning in essence is, let's say you're out there and you're fishing your soft plastics, and all of a sudden you start reeling it back in, because you see this other place that you think you're going to get a bite. So you start reeling it back in, and just as it comes into sight below the surface, you see a fish just eat it. Well, it tells you a couple things. It tells you they want it moving faster, and maybe they're higher in the water column. And because their position in the water column, they want something closer to the surface. So then maybe I might be thinking about a top water, or I might be thinking about a swim jig where I can run it just underneath the surface, or a shallow running crankbait. Because again, we learned, and they're telling us that they want something moving, and that they want it kind of higher in the water column. So that's what they mean by you have to have some success. You have to have some sort of feedback from the fish. And that helps you kind of understand what the fish want.
So when you get a bite, pay attention and try to duplicate that, over and over. Man, that's good stuff right there. I think now, James, tell us about the tours. You have been like I think a 3-time winner on the Bassmaster, like the Opens. Tell me what you've won. And listen, here's my feeble mind. I'm getting so old now. I still call the BFL the red man. Okay. When it changes, I'm like, what is going on? I mean, is it the Bass Pro Tour? Is it the Series 5? Is it the Major League? Tell us everything you fish and tell us about your wins. I want to hear about those.
Currently I'm fishing the M.L.F. Big 5 Pro Circuit, which differs from the Bass Pro Tour. And the Bass Pro Tour is catch, weigh, release, and all fish count. Well, on the Big 5, you can only weigh 5 fish, and you actually bring them into to the weigh-in, submit them to the weighmaster, and you weigh them just like a standard tournament, like we've always done. As far as success, so in 2006,
yeah, this is the one I want to hear about.
Yeah, 2006 was just an amazing year. In 2006, I fished the BFLs, and I fished what Bass had, which was kind of comparable to the BFLs, which was the Bassmaster Weekend Series. It was a series of, single day tournaments, 4 or 5. I think there was 5 of them during the course of a year, and you qualified for the regional. Well, I happened to qualify for the regional on the BFL, which was held on Lake Ouachita, and I also qualified, which BFL, for people that maybe aren't familiar with that, that was originally the Red Man Tournament Trail, and that was owned by, what was the name of that?
Was that Jerry? Jerry, no, wasn't Jerry Ryan. It was, I can't remember.
Golly. Now I'm okay. Well, the important thing is the Red Man Trail was bought by FLW Outdoors. So then they called it the BFLs. Right. So the BFLs were that regional series. And so I've qualified for that. And then Bassmasters had their weekend series, and I qualified for that regional. And that was the year that my son was born.
Oh, okay.
And he was only about a month or 2. And I drove to the Lake Ouachita. This is kind of a long story, but drove to the Lake Ouachita BFL regional in Arkansas, and I won it. And I won a boat and a truck.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And then a month later, I went to the regional on the Red River, the Bassmaster Weekend Series regional, and I won it. And that was just such an amazing blessing, because here I am with a brand new family and a son, and I'm not quite sure, how's this whole fishing thing even going to work out? So that was the year. Also, the following year, I fished the Opens, which they called it. They had the Northern and Southern Opens, and of the Bassmaster. And that season, I won one of the events on Santee Cooper Reservoir, where you live.
That's where I live. That's the one I want to hear about. I've heard, now, folks, you got to understand, I've heard these stories before, so I know, but tell us about that event. Tell us about how you won that one, man.
Well, that was coming from California. We have a lot of clear water, and I love to sight fish. So when I came out to the east and moved to Texas, that was something I had done a lot of. And so when the fish were on beds, I was like, man, this is just like where I grew up bass fishing. I was always up there looking for shallow bedding fish, and that's how they were set up. There was a lot of them. There weren't as many fish on beds, quality fish. There was, a handful of quality. There was quite a few small ones that really wouldn't help, but I'll make it quick. So I think I had mid-20s on day 1. Maybe it was 27 or 28 pounds on day 1. And then on day 2, I think I had, I'm trying to remember, I should remember this like it happened yesterday, but mid-20s on day 2. On day 3 of that tournament, I want to say I had a pretty large lead, and I only weighed in 2 bass, but one of them was a 10-pounder.
10-pounder. I remember you talking about, you said it looked like a cart, like waddling around over that deal.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I could see it on a bed over there. And I threw over to it with a number of different baits, and it wouldn't bite. And so I changed up, threw another bait over there. And meanwhile, I was in a little lily pad field, and I was pulling it like this, and I stopped, and I thought I just remember looking, like, I don't know if I saw another fish or whatever. I started looking around, and all of a sudden my rod loaded up, and I just set the hook, and he started cutting these lily pads off, like, yeah. These pads were just, as he was just cutting through these lily pads. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's a giant. I mean, I could tell it was a giant from way off, and it was just giant. It was 10 something, a 10.06 or something like that. And
wow.
If you're only going to have 2, you're going to need a 10-pounder if you want to win. So
absolutely. The Bassmasters are headed to Santee in just a couple of weeks, and I think they're going to be hitting it, very similar, type of tournament that you fished that time. So, man, that's awesome, man. God, that's got to be. It took me 50 years to catch a 10-pounder. 50 years, and I've caught one. That's it. I've got friends that say, "Yeah, I caught so many," and I'm like, "Goodness, that's a just a bucket list fish for every bass fisherman that has ever tried to cast." And speaking of that, man, lately, have you noticed how many double-digit fish are being caught? I mean, on every trade, it seems like double-digit fish are coming everywhere this year. What is going on with that?
I was just in my boat yesterday. I'm preparing to get ready to leave, and I was thinking about what you said, because you said that to me a while back, or a week ago or something like that, and I thought, man, there really is something to it. And over the years, as I've fished, I've noticed there's been years that are just marked with big fish. And what's interesting is, we're seeing it on the tours. Guys are catching big ones, giants. However, here in the state of Texas, Tyler's Real Fishing,
Right.
he caught a 14 like a month ago. Sorry about that. That's my dog. I've got a
Hey,
puppy.
we love dogs here on the Bass Chaplain Fishing Podcast. We are pro dog, so no problem.
and then just recently, one of the other guys on the M.L.F. Big 5 Pro Circuit, the tournament trail that I compete on, his name's Kyle Hall. He just posted on Instagram, he caught a 1607. I said that, yeah, 16.07. It's really interesting. There's just, guys are just, it's one of those years where there's just a lot of big fish catches.
It's crazy. Kumar had on his Bass Blaster a guy that caught like an 11-pound spotted bass. I'd have a heart attack.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd have an absolute heart attack. That's like having a 14-point buck under your stand. I'd just be shaking. I wouldn't know, even know what to do. Man, that is awesome. I tell you, I can't wait. This year, you and I have gone through, something similar in our wives having cancer. And this year, so I haven't been out. I've got a brand new Nitro Z18 that will be given away later in the year, but I hadn't even put it in the water yet. And so I'm kind of chomping at the bit to try to get out there. But we've always had fishing, in common, but really the reason that we met, we'd have probably never met if it was just about fishing. Okay. The reason 100%. We met is because we both had, and a lot of guys, and this is what this podcast is about. We've had an encounter with God, and you had an encounter with God. And tell us a little bit now. Now you didn't. I mean, a lot of people say, I grew up in church, or I grew up in. Tell us about your life before you met Christ. What was it like?
So I was born and raised Catholic, baptized at a really early age, like Catholics do, and throughout my growing up, I always I always knew that that in my heart, I always knew I never questioned whether God was real or not, which in looking back, I think that's awesome, because I know that can be a barrier for people. They have that question of whether God is real or not, but I didn't, because I was raised at a really early age and went to church, typically, Easter, Thanksgiving, Christmas. And later in life, we started going every Sunday. But yeah, that's the early part of my my relation, of my understanding of God.
Right.
And as time went on, I moved from obviously from California to Texas. But throughout that period of understanding of God, I knew God was real, but I did not live anything like God was real. Like I just did whatever it is that I wanted to do, and God has a way in which we are to live, because that is the way He's created us to be, to live in the manner which is not only pleasing to God, but in the manner that is the way we're created to live, to be. And but I didn't do that. I was just kind of doing whatever James wanted to do, whatever I wanted to do. I just kind of, I would just do it. It was more of a selfish type thing. And so I wouldn't say that I was really even following God then, although I believed that God was real.
Right.
And when I moved to Texas in 2001, Kelly Jordan invited me to a co-ed volleyball game. He's like, down in Tyler, there's got the co-ed volleyball game. So we went down there, me and a few guys. But at the same time, before that all started, we went over to Jay Yellis's house, Jay and Jill Yellis, his wife.
Yeah.
And they had like some food for us, and we just kind of hung out as we waited for that to start. And I later found out that it wasn't a co-ed volleyball game. I think he got the days mixed up, but there was a co-ed Bible study. So that's what we ended up going to that night. But Jay's wife, Jill, said, do you know where you're going to, she asked me, do you know where you're going to go? Do you know what's going to happen after your life is over? Do you know if you're going to go to heaven or hell? And I said, I don't. And she said, well, would you like to know? And I said, absolutely. I'd love to have that assurance. And she led me in a sinner's prayer where I repented of my sins and turned to God. And things didn't just magically change for me. I still was struggling with James, wanting to follow God, but also wanting to do James things. And it was a matter, just of time. I ended up going to another new church. I didn't go to the Catholic church anymore. And I went to this other church. I was working with a family, and I said, well, where can I go to church? And they said, I should, try some different places. But I went down to this one church, and the pastor gave this message on tithing. And he said, this is probably the most unpopular message that anybody wants to hear, but
right. Yeah.
He said, because when it happens to deal with your money, he said, people just don't want to hear that God has a plan for your life as well as what you should do with your money. And he said, he challenged us with that if we believe that God could, really do something in our finances, that we should begin tithing. He said, oh, you probably don't think you have money to tithe, but give him 6 months to show himself faithful. So just begin tithing. And I was like, I don't know if I could even do this, because as it was, I was living check to check, and I don't even know that I had a mountain of debt, and I was trying to pay that off. And I was like, but I was inspired by the message, and I wanted to try it. So I did that. I started tithing, and it was amazing. It was like, first I got big bass at a tournament, and then so that was like $500. It was almost, it was like half of what you'd get if you won the thing.
Right.
Yeah. It was great. And then so the next tournament, I got big bass in that event. So I had another $500. And I'm thinking, what are the chances that I would begin tithing and then start getting, having, winning big bass 2 times I believe it was in a row. If it wasn't, it was the next event, but it was really quickly. And then shortly after that, I was working at a tackle store, and the owners of the company asked me into the office, and they said, well, we would like to offer you an opportunity to have more responsibility, but also give you a raise. And I was totally unsolicited. And here, all of a sudden, I'm trusting that God is going to take care of me financially as long as I follow him in this. And all of a sudden, here comes, just by being obedient to what God asked us to do, to tithe, to give 10% of our first fruits back to the church, back to him, then all of a sudden it was like, wow, all of a sudden here comes the money that I didn't have. It was like, it was so amazing to me, because it was like that first encounter with God, like real encounter where God was showing himself faithful in a way that I've never seen before. And it was so much more than money, because it was what James wanted to do, that's what I've always done. And then God is asking me to do something, and he's like saying, follow me, trust me. And then I found him trustworthy. And that's where things really started to shift for me, as far as like, I want to really follow God. not because what he's going to bless me with, but he used that financial situation to show me that I can trust him. And shortly after that, there's a scripture verse that just continued to come up, and it was Matthew 6:33. First seek the kingdom of God and all his righteousness, and all else will be added unto you. And I may have botched it a little bit, but essentially the most important thing is first seek God.
Right.
Follow him.
Well, let me ask you this now. Now you were discipled by your wife. Is that correct?
Well, that was the beginning of our relationship.
Okay. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I met her at Jay Ellis's house. They brought this lady over. She was from China, where she was going to share testimony. And before that, let me get this straight. So they invited a lot of people over. And so my wife was there because she was friends with Jill. And she was there. And so I saw her and really kind of briefly met her. And I found out that she was a full-time missionary with Youth with a Mission. And like 6 months later, I switched churches and ran into her. And I was like, oh, wow, it's,
totally by accident. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that I knew that she went to that church. I can't really remember, but the people that I worked with I said, hey, where do you guys go to church? So they said, come over. This is where we go to church. So we went there. I went there and I ran into her. And it's kind of a funny story. Church was starting and she remembers me. She's like, you're that fishing guy, right? And I said, yeah. And I said, well, we could hear the music in beginning. And so I knew church was starting. I said, well, let's connect afterwards. I didn't realize how long church was in that, how long the service was. Yeah. And I told my buddy I'd meet him up at the lake. So I didn't even stay to the end. And I took off and went fishing with my buddy.
Oh, man.
And so she says I stood her up. And in essence, I really did. But I was trying to meet my commitment there. But anyways, we ended up communicating. And it was awesome because I felt like I really didn't know how to get the answers that I wanted to know about God. I'm a new Christian. I want to know what it is to be a disciple of Jesus. So I was always just firing these questions at her. She may not have had all the answers, but she would research it and, come back and say, okay, this is what it says. And so this is really the beginning of our relationship. And so, yeah, in essence. And so we actually went on our first date, which I thought was my first date, but she didn't think we were going on a first date.
She didn't see it that way. So.
She didn't see it that way.
Yeah.
So we went to see Spider-Man. And then
which Spider-Man was that? Was that
was the original, like the very first one.
The first guy. Okay.
What's his name?
Yeah, Toby.
Toby. Yes,
yeah.
He was the very first guy.
Yeah.
So we went and saw Spider-Man, and then afterwards we were driving back, and we got on the topic of baptism. Okay. And so I was like, I want to be baptized. And she's like, well, like, you mean like right now? And I'm like, yeah, I want to be baptized. And so we went back to the campus where she's the full-time missionary, and she got a couple guys out of the dorm, and we went down to the pond, and she baptized me in the pond. Your future wife baptized you. That's
dude, that is awesome. Wow. Well, that's the way to start a relationship. That's the way it should be. That's it. That's awesome.
Cool. Well, the interesting thing about the relationship that Santee and I had at that point was, here I come out of a Catholic background, and I know that priests don't marry, nuns don't marry, and I don't know, because she's a full-time missionary. I don't even know if she even want to be married. Does she, can she be married? I don't know any of that, and so I really didn't know what kind of we have a friendship, what's going on, but at the same time, that was probably one of the better things about our first interactions was I felt like we could put our worst foot forward.
Yeah.
Just be as real as we could be. because we don't really know where this thing's going.
Right.
You know, it just was as natural as could be. And that's one of the things that was probably pretty amazing about her and I in our,
Man,
in our
that
early
is so
relationship.
awesome. So how long have you been married now?
We've been married, this will be, is it 18 years?
18
Yeah,
years.
04.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
this past January, 18 years.
Yeah, that's awesome. Congratulations. That's amazing. What a great story. You know, I love it that that there are testimonies like this for guys that are in the top of the sport to be able to say, you know what, I can be a follower of Christ, and I can also compete at the highest level in professional bass fishing. That is an awesome deal. So we're going to get to the time now. This is my favorite part of the deal here. And guess who was the first person to suggest that I should do this? And it was James Niggemeyer. He said, you know what you ought to do at your podcast? You ought to have professional fishermen imitate and do impressions of other professional fishermen. So James, you know, here's your deal. Who are we going to hear you imitate today? What's the deal?
I've been thinking about this, and I'm pretty close to Takahiro, and I'm pretty close to Cliff Crochet, and both of them have really, you know, kind of noticeable, I want to say accents or just the way that they speak.
Right.
So I'm gonna do Cliff Crochet.
Let's hear it.
Here we go.
The Cajun Baby coming up.
Here we go. Cajun Baby, Cliff Crochet. Hey, buddy, what do you say we get in this here boat and run up the bayou, throw that spinnerbait and the jig, catch a couple big old bass. Maybe we'll even go out afterwards and have some crawfish and just have a big old time. But the most important thing is don't hit any alligators while we're running up that bayou.
Oh man, the Cajun Baby by James Niggemeyer, everybody. That is awesome. Awesome deal, man. This has been a great time. James, I could talk to you all day, man. I love you, buddy. And I tell you, well, we're gonna wrap this thing up, and that's what you get here on the Bass Chaplain Fishing Podcast. And let me tell you, if you haven't, if you're watching us on YouTube and you haven't hit that subscribe button, go ahead and hit that button and follow James Niggemeyer. What's your YouTube channel, James?
James Niggemeyer. Oh, my YouTube is James Niggemeyer Fishing.
James Niggemeyer Fishing. You need to get on there. I watch James all the time. I learned so much from his videos. It's just blowing up. And I am so excited he was here today. Don't forget to hit that red button, hit the little bell to subscribe, or wherever you're listening on the podcast. Make sure you subscribe. We want to thank you for being here today. If you ever have a question about faith, if you ever have a question about spiritual things, you're a bass fisherman, or just whoever you are, if you're listening, you know, feel free to contact me. I would be delighted to show you how you can have a relationship with Christ. This is the Bass Chaplain, and this is the podcast where faith and fishing hook up.